For our group presentation discussing the hydrophobic effect, I will be doing the introductory part. So, to start off with, I will lead with a brief overview of what the hydrophobic effect actually is. And in essence, it relates the interaction between molecules of water and molecules that are essentially afraid of water, or hydrophobic molecules, or hydrophobes. So the reason that they're called hydrophobes is, as you can probably guess, they don't really interact very well with water. And molecules that actually fall under this category, for example, are all non-polar molecules like paths. Now, for a long time, it was assumed that non-polar molecules don't really mix or dissolve in water because of the weak van der Waals forces that would form or exist between them. Through a lot of studying and observations, however, it was later determined that these hydrophobic interactions have less to do with the van der Waals forces themselves, and in all likelihood, a lot more to do with the entropic effects that would arise from the disruption of the hydrogen bonds on the polar molecules themselves whenever there is forced interaction between them and non-polar molecules. However, even this stance is subject to a lot of contention because there is very little clarity as to what the interactions and the mechanisms between those interactions actually might be like. And for that sake, there isn't a lot of understanding as to what actually happens in these kinds of situations. Now, talking about what actually influences these interactions, there are three factors which have more of a clear role than all others. The first is temperature. With variation in temperature, there is more energy or less energy available for the interactions themselves, and to a certain degree, they can be forced. The second is the inherent hydrophobicity or non-polar nature of whatever molecule it is that is the focus of our subject. And the more the polarity, the less likely it is to interact with water. The third is a little more specific in that it has more to do with the shape of the molecule. And as you would probably guess, something that has more surface area, something that is larger, is influenced more by these kinds of effects in that there are more water molecules which actually are forced to interact with the non-polar molecule. Getting to why these actually matter, the fact is that these are extremely influential. So when a non-polar substance is added to water, the water has a propensity to form a cage around it in some sense. And this thermodynamically is not very favorable. Now, as a consequence of the fact that this interaction is not very favorable, if there is another non-polar molecule that is introduced to this mixture, there is a very high tendency for the two non-polar molecule species to interact favorably and drive the water out of the equation. These interactions between these non-polar molecules in water is essentially what is termed as the hydrophobic effect. In terms of consequence, this has a lot of roles that it fulfills in a lot of biological systems. The most unique is that it helps in the folding of macromolecules like proteins. Now, because of the fact that proteins have hydrophobic amino acids, for example, glycine or alanine or valine, clustered together within the protein, whenever they're exposed to a water, they tend to fall together in a way wherein they tend to distance themselves from the polar water molecules. And this causes the folding of the protein, which compresses it, makes it more compact, makes it easier to transport, and also decreases the amount of energy that would be required in terms of stabilizing the molecule itself. Something similar happens even in stabilizing the tertiary forms of DNA. A still more important role, however, is the fact that it ends up serving as a driving force for a lot of otherwise thermodynamically unfeasible processes. This happens because of the fact that the water can specifically be removed from the system, and the coalition of two non-polar molecules is suddenly possible. And when they are brought in close proximity and the water is suddenly removed, the reaction can be driven forward with a lot of ease. And this makes it possible for a lot of these reactions to be carried out in situations wherein water is the basic medium inside the cell organelles, for example. To wrap up, I just wanted to talk about how ridiculous it is that something as basic as the mixing of oil and water is not really very well understood, and that somehow the interactions there are what form the basis of so many of these complex sequences and cascades in biological systems without which we wouldn't really exist. Thank you so much for listening to me patiently. If you have any questions, you can send them to me on WhatsApp, and I'd like to hand over the mic to the next speaker.